Hey adapters, I'm Doug Parsons. I'm a partner at Cimpatico Studios where we live stream conversations about complex business and social challenges with professionals like yourself who are working on the same issues. Our shows are live streamed in front of a global audience of your professional peers on Cimpatico.tv. I'm building a new type of online community for professionals like yourself on the Climate Adaptation channel. If you're a regular listener of my America Adapts podcast, I think you'll find that we're taking our conversations about important problems, policies, and solutions to the next level here. And if you're interested in being a guest, we'd love to hear from you. And now join us for this latest episode. Hey adapters, welcome back. Today our guest is Bill Nussey. Bill has been a tech CEO for 25 years. Through an IPO and 2 exits, his companies have created billions in shareholder value. He is now focused on accelerating the shift to clean energy as the CEO of Solar Inventions and as the author of the website, blog, and podcast Freeing Energy. Bill will discuss the market for solar products and the emerging technologies that make solar better. He explains how solar energy has managed to decline in price so aggressively and how his organization is contributing to this cost reduction. Hey, Bill, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me, Doug. Looking forward to chatting with you.
Well, I'm checking in with all my guests. First, with COVID-19, how's that impacting you and what you're doing there?
Well, I got to tell you, this morning we cut the ribbon on a large solar project at a school here outside of Atlanta, and it's the first time I've worn pants in a long time. So I've been working out of my basement and in front of Zoom like this for the last couple of months. But other than that, it has definitely slowed down some of the solar projects, but I think things are starting to get back to normal again. Very exciting.
All right, before we jump into Solar Inventions and some of the technology that you're working on, I guess your story, I did that introduction there, but you're only relatively recent to the renewable energy space, right?
I'm a newbie. I'm a convert, so to speak. I spent a decade, 2 decades in software, growing and exiting some companies, working with great teams, and saw some of these early transitions like the rise of the internet and rise of internet marketing, and got excited about these huge disruptions, right? And I was working at IBM after we sold my company to them, and saw clean energy as the next huge disruption. Got really excited about it and made the leap about 3 years ago.
Well, we were just talking about it, but I have to give you a chance to plug it here too. You said you have a son who's in this space too. Is that right?
Yeah, my son, who just graduated from Georgia Tech, is started a company in the software side of solar, helping commercial solar installations make sense, do predictive maintenance, things like that. There's so many opportunities. It feels like the internet did back in the late 1990s.
All right. Well, that's great. What a solar family. That's a very encouraging thing.
Yes.
All right. So the episode is titled "How Much Cheaper Can Solar Get?" And I want to talk about that. And I think about the prices have dropped dramatically. And can you maybe give us a short history of solar prices? Because it always used to be that, well, that's just going to be too expensive. What sort of happened over the last few decades?
Most people still think it's too expensive, and if they're going off data that's 2 or 3 years old, they could still be right. But if you go back to the first solar panels on spaceships, they were a whole lot cheaper, better than batteries that didn't last. And so back then, you're going to spend $70 for a watt. And over the last 40 years, the price of solar has dropped like 300 times, and it's continuing to drop. So the key is that solar is not a fuel, it's a technology. And when people wrap their head around that, they realize that solar is more like their iPhone or their laptop in terms of the progress and price drop. They realize that the economics of electricity generation in the world are going to go through a transition that's just never happened before.
Well, and I think a big leap too is just, and I'm thinking about government intervention too. I think the big stimulus plan that happened, it's probably going on like 10 years or something like that. Yeah. Did that play a role in, because I hear conflicting things, but did that play a role in really kind of getting the price of solar to drop, or was that overhyped?
No, I think there's a lot of concerns among people that would prefer solar to remain in the future, not today. They would argue that it requires subsidies to be cost effective. And once upon a time, that was the case. By the way, we also subsidized as a country that natural gas and fracking tremendously. Natural gas and fracking would never have become as successful as it has become had it not been for the similar kind of subsidies 20, 30 years ago that we've now had. And you and I were talking before we started the recording, and try not to get too partisan, but it's interesting to folks that nearly all of the subsidies for solar and wind were put in place under Republican presidents. And so it's only in the last 10 or 15 years that it's become something that the political parties argue about. For better or worse, the federal subsidies for solar are scheduled to wind down next year. So from a federal point of view, there will be no more subsidies after about a 15-year run.
So what's your impression of that? Should the Fed still stay involved with subsidizing solar, at least for the time being?
I'm not going to get super started on this.
Okay.
I'll just give you the high level and tell you that I have two strong opinions. One is that solar is now cost competitive enough that it probably doesn't need subsidies. And that's why the government subsidizes everything early on, to make things that are scientifically and national interest appropriate, but make them commercial. But we are still subsidizing fossil fuels to a tremendous degree, billions and billions of dollars a year. So if I could have my wish, I would ask that we end all subsidies. But if we're going to continue fossil fuel subsidies, like accelerated depreciation and things like that, then I would politely request that we continue solar subsidies, at least until we can review it all objectively.
No, I haven't looked at it in a while, but I think maybe 10 years ago, I was looking at the economics of subsidizing fossil fuels like oil. If you truly paid the true price of it, you'd be paying like $12 a gallon, and that goes into defending Middle East oil and all that. So it's actually a huge number. People just don't realize it.
And a lot of those, like, people comment on the external costs of coal because of the health issues and pollution issues, but really the government's just literally writing checks, just like they do for the old solar subsidies, the tax incentives. They're doing the same actual real dollars to help keep fossil fuels cost competitive. So it's if we really want to quit picking favorites, as they say in government, we can remove all subsidies. And I think I, for one, and most people, would be pretty happy.
Well, you mentioned the price drop from $70, and I think it's
25 cents
to 25 cents. And it occurred to me, you said, solar is a technology, it's not the actual fuel itself, but is there actually a threat that if solar becomes too cheap, players don't want to come into it, or is that just not how the industry is sort of unfolding now? You see what I'm saying? It's like all of a sudden, can you sort of make money off solar because it's so cheap? Is that an issue?
Well, a lot of the big oil companies are starting to get into solar because they see the writing on the wall, especially with the reduction in consumption because of COVID. There's an article this morning about how some of the large renewable energy owners are actually have higher market caps than some of the oil companies. So I do think that the cost is I'm sorry.
It's all right. It's more about just the falling prices. Would that actually kind of hurt the industry? Like, let's say falling oil prices hurt the oil industry.
I do think that it's a possibility, but the world's going to need energy of every form, and particularly the renewable energy type. So I think until we have a surplus of energy overall, the investments are still going to continue to flow in at a very rapid rate of all types. I think we're still going to see large investments in natural gas. That's some people are against that, but overall, all types of energy, solar, wind, batteries, natural gas, we're going to see everything.
Well, and I guess to your point that if solar is a technology and not the fuel itself, again, the market will be for the technologies and not this abundant fuel that's not really part of the equation. So I guess that's how hopefully the industry will unfold. Well, Solar Inventions, what are you doing there? What is your company, and then what are some of the technologies you're doing?
So solar is actually, like I said, a lot more like your iPhone or your laptop than an oil rig or anything like that. And it benefits from something I call in my freeing energy work, economies of volume. That is, the more you make of a thing, the cheaper it gets. And so, and you compare that, say, to a nuclear. We have 1,000 nuclear plants across the world, right? So we only get a couple hundred chances to learn and grow. So we have maybe 100,000 wind turbines. So every one of those, we do this more often. We get smarter about wind turbines. Last year, my math says that we made 20 billion solar cells. So the number of these things we make allows us to build economies of scale, and even small changes have massive economic benefits. And that's the secret of why solar has become so inexpensive. And by the way, hint, hint, batteries are following the same trend. So what my company does is it builds on this economies of volume, and we've got a a brand new way. It's a new kind of science. It's actually pretty simple, but no one's thought of it before, which is the great part about solar. There's so much room for innovation.
Mm.
And we are able to take a traditional solar cell with the 20 billion that were made last year, and hopefully billions of those cells going forward will employ our technology. And what we do is we found a way to electrically make the cell into small parts. And this is just a strange property of electricity. But when you send less current through something, it produces less heat, and therefore it becomes more efficient. And so we take a solar cell that might run 10 amps through it, and we break it into electrically into 5 little or 10 little solar cells. It's still a single cell. You don't have to break it into pieces or anything, but by dividing the current by 10, you actually reduce the heat geometrically, and the thing becomes more efficient. It's a little sciencey, but it's really cool and it works. And so we won $1 million from the government to develop this out, and we're now commercializing it. It's just a lot of fun.
Okay, and with the government giving that money, you guys won a big award, right?
Yeah, we did. This is actually pretty cool. I didn't know much about the government funding, but as we were talking earlier, subsidies is only one way the government helps all kinds of energy. The government puts tens of billions of dollars into nuclear innovation and battery innovation and natural gas innovation and solar innovation. And typically, though, what they do for this R&D stuff is they work with university labs and giant corporate labs. And they realized that solar is something that can be done by entrepreneurs. So they started this new thing called a Solar Prize about a year and a half ago. They've never done anything like it, and it's aimed at entrepreneurs. And they basically, it's like a business plan competition. You get up there, you do your pitch, and you go through rounds. And eventually, we won the first ever round of this, and a total of about $850,000 of cash in vouchers, and all towards helping accelerate the success of solar. So we had a very sciencey solution. Other people have software solutions. Other people make the one company that won the recent round pulls large numbers of solar panels behind tractors so they can be moved throughout farms to power parts of farms as the seasons change. Just really interesting stuff. And the it's been a huge success, and they continue this program a couple times a year. And they just announced the first place winners the other day. Really exciting stuff. We're very proud to be part of it.
Well, congrats. So this technology, you're making just the individual cells more, I guess, productive, more efficient. Mm-hmm. Who would be a client? I'm sort of thinking, would it, let's say you're doing solar in your home, or is it the people that are actually manufacturing the solar cells? I mean, yeah, explain.
So people call us up and say, can I buy some of your panels? And we have to tell them that we don't sell the technology to you, the consumer, or the solar installer. We sell our technology to the people who manufacture the panels and the cells. And I describe it to them and to my friends is we figured out a better way to bake bread. And so you're going to make the bread anyway. We're going to give you a couple of tips on how to bake better bread. And when you're done, you'll have a product that's better than the alternative. And it's really, when you get to this really science stuff, these hardcore science things, it's a lot like recipes. It's formulas and approaches. And we just have a different one than anyone's come up with before. And so we are selling it to a few American companies. There's not a lot of solar built in America, manufactured in America anymore, sadly. But also companies that are based in Asia, which is where the mass majority of solar is made.
Well, and you're still working on the technology, or
Yes.
you're okay? So you're not selling to clients just yet, but it's
both.
Okay.
It's like baking, right? We're always improving the recipe, and as we go to large bread factories, to the large solar manufacturers, and they run it through their processes, they learn, and they come give us feedback, and obviously we are able to improve the product and help them and others that come along behind them to make better solar cells.
Well, I guess what you are also doing, if you're kind of a secret weapon with these solar companies, is that you think of these plants that are built. All right, we're going to do 10 acres and we're going to do this sort of solar farm. But if this solar company uses your technology, they're going to be 10 times more productive in the solar that they're producing, in theory, right?
Well, if it could be 10 times better, we would be the wealthiest company in the history of humanity. I think this is an industry of 1% and 2%.
Okay.
And and a lot of people say, well, why does that matter? But if you look at 1% on $1 billion, that's a really, really large number. And that's how this industry grows. That's how your iPhone gets cheaper. every little component of your iPhone, there's just one transistor is 2% better, and the camera is 6% better, and all that adds up. And the next thing you know, you've got these huge generations, and that's what all these inventions like ours and dozens of others have aggregated into making the price of solar cheaper and cheaper every year.
All right, and when I guess too, if you're making solar, I guess more accessible and cheaper too, is it just would utilities, I guess, encourage the use of these solar cells because they're going to
Yes.
just want more and more of this? So are you having
Right.
those conversations? Or you just don't even worry about it because you're just dealing with the solar cell companies?
There's not a lot of American solar innovation companies, so people manage to find us even if we're not going to be able to sell them a solution directly. And my one of my business partners is one of the world's more uh, successful solar scientists, and so his advice is sought after all over the place. So we do get pulled into those conversations, but ultimately, our business works by people licensing our technology and applying it to their existing factories. The great news is that they don't have to make any changes. They don't have to buy any new equipment. They can test it for free, basically. We actually guarantee it. That's kind of a crazy thing in the world of solar to say we actually guarantee if you use our technology, it'll produce a return for you. Otherwise, you don't pay us. It took me a little while to actually pitch ourselves that way because it sounds like a garage sale, but it works because there's really no other innovation like ours in the industry, and it's 30 years.
Do you get caught up in the conversations around the grid? Like, right now there's issues with the grid not going to be able to take on certain areas of energy because it's it's not set up, or you have to have constant energy flow and such. Have you gotten caught up that, or you're focused? If you know what I mean, it's just like
I do. There's the reason I do the Freeing Energy Project is there's all these myths. And one of the myths we mentioned earlier is that solar is very expensive. It no longer is. Another myth is that the intermittency of solar, and I think that's the word you were looking for, is somehow a big problem for the grid. But Texas is crossing 50% solar and wind all the time. So the notion that the grid can't take variable resources is just old thinking. And so we do get caught up in it. And that's really this book, podcast, website I do, that's one of its main ideas is to get out there that this new technology is less money than you think. It's more it's more grid ready than you think. And I just go through case studies and interview some of the smartest people in the world and show the world that this stuff's happening now. A lot of folks don't want it to happen. There's a lot of trillions of dollars invested in existing infrastructure, existing fossil fuel systems, but those are just fading away very quickly. And simply a better solution at a better price, which is solar and batteries.
well,
And
I
Solar Inventions is helping make it better.
well I have solar in my house, and I just
Cool.
I gotta do my part, right? And love it, love it. They give you an app and you track how much solar you're producing every 15 minutes. It's really just kind of empowering. But I think of your technology, these companies, the idea of retrofitting. Do you think if solar panels get so cheap that a lot of solar installers here at the city level would go back and sort of say, you know what, you might want to like actually reinstall, and it even would make a sense cost wise? Do you kind of see that down the line?
I do actually, but only 2% of American roofs have solar on them, which is a pretty low number compared to other parts of the world. And so I think the biggest business opportunity is the 98% of the roofs that don't have solar of any kind. But for you, for example, yeah, I think a couple of years out, you could upgrade your solar panels and it would probably pay for itself pretty quickly. So yeah, it's just getting cheap so fast.
All right, I got a question here from Zach. What is the ultimate price to the end user using these new solar programs?
Well, it depends. That's the cocktail party question I get all the time. Like, how much is it going to cost me to put solar on my roof? And it's kind of like saying, how much is it going to cost me to buy a house or to buy a car? It completely depends on what you want. And the tough news about solar is you got to make some decisions, like how much do I want to pay for, and do I finance it? Very similar to buying a car. Do I lease it? Do I rent it? Do I buy it? How often do I change it? But people aren't used to it with solar. The good news is there's a ton of sites. I think of companies like EnergySage.com, where you go in, type where you live, and they can actually give you a really good estimate of how much solar you could put on your roof and how much it would save you if you did. And you get a pretty quick idea. And in Georgia, where I live, we don't really love solar as a state. Actually, people like me do, but the government doesn't. But I was talking to a friend of mine New York, and he was going to put a $30,000 solar panel system on his roof, but the government and incentives from the state were going to make that only about $6,000 out of his wallet. So that was a layup for him. And then, of course, his electricity bills get slashed, and the value of his house goes up dramatically. Research shows that if you put solar on your roof, it's probably one of the best returns in terms of selling your house in the future, better than, say, a renovation or landscaping. You get more money when you sell your house with solar because it just saves the next homeowner money. It's a great investment. Pretty much a layup everywhere in the country, to be honest with you. But in the South, where electricity is very cheap, it's probably the least attractive right now, but still a good deal.
I grew up in Florida, and Florida Power went out of their way to sort of say, you know what, there's no sun here. We don't need to focus on solar
Really?
power.
No sun in Florida. Yeah.
Oh my goodness.
The southern states are a little slower. They've got different business models for how electricity is delivered than most of the U.S. They're all what they call vertically integrated utilities, and these are amazing companies, but solar complicates their world in a way that maybe isn't the same if you live in California or Massachusetts or New York, or Hawaii, where the governments and the utilities are motivated to do a lot more. It's not how much sun you have; it's got a lot more to do with the perspective. Just funny, one of the biggest reasons New York is so excited about solar and battery is because of Sandy, 10, 12, 15 years ago. And all these people lost power for weeks, and they're like, this is baloney. And they pushed the New York government to become what is now one of the most forward-thinking solar battery governments in the United States. But it was because of Sandy, I would argue, not because of anything else, not because of politics.
And as you are experiencing, and when you encounter it, just like local policies and how they can, screw up, I guess, adoption of solar here in Arizona, it was pretty good. It was better than a lot of other states, but they're phasing out of it. But it's all about net zero, right? It's just like they don't want you producing excess that you're going to sell back into the grid and maybe make even some money, because they only want to give you the amount of solar that really meets your needs as a homeowner. And I sort of get that too. But if you're an early adopter, it's like, well, why not? Why not make it like an opportunity to actually earn some money? Because I look at mine, and it didn't. They were supposed to only design the system to produce enough energy for my home, but I get obsessive about it, and I'm just like, oh, we don't need the AC today, and so I contribute more over a year, and they give you a pittance back. They pay you, but it's just like, all right, you made $20 this year, so it's just such a mishmash of rules and regs.
And it's because electric utilities sit in this really, really weird space, which I talk a lot about in my book, which they're not the government and they're not private corporations. They sit in between. But they're corporations enough that every time you generate a kilowatt hour at your house, that's less revenue for them. But they are regulated by the government, who wants you to be happy. And so they do this constant internal battle of what to do. And Arizona has been one of the craziest roller coasters for solar in the country. But most places do not want to pay you for more than you generate.
It is ridiculous.
Or more than you use.
It's ridiculous how much sun we get in Arizona. I love it, especially in the wintertime, but it's like every home should have solar, and they decided not
every home should have solar, and eventually will.
Well, we're at the end of the episode here, and I just want to give you a chance. So what's next for you guys? I know you're selling it, but you're working on the technology. What's next 6 months, next year for you guys?
So my partner, the scientist, Ben, has some whole slew of ideas. So as we bring this first product, which we call C3, to market, hopefully this time next year, we'll have many companies across the world incorporating our technology and selling it to the end users like you, and when you upgrade your solar panels. And we're going to use that to fund the next set of even more breakthrough innovations that my partner has. And so we're looking at things where the solar cells become smart. They turn themselves on and off based on whether they're being shaded, which is a big issue in solar. You take out a single cell in a panel, and the entire panel can shut down, or a portion of the panel can shut down, just because of the way electricity works. So we're working on, smart's not the right word. We'll get a good name for them, but they're smart enough they shut themselves off so they don't take down the whole panel with them. And all kinds of cool stuff coming. So this is an incredibly interesting space. It's one of the largest business opportunities in human history. And I'm glad that you guys are getting the great word out there about all the interesting science and business going on in the world of sustainability and clean energy, because watch this space, ladies and gentlemen. It's going to get really interesting. Tesla's one of the first companies that's wildly innovating, but there's going to be dozens of multi-billion-dollar companies born that are going to be the Apples and Googles and Microsofts of the next era coming. And maybe solar inventions will be one of them. That's certainly our ambition.
Well, excellent. Good luck. Wish you luck in all that. And maybe we have you back on and there's a particular project or whatever. We'd love to keep this conversation going with what you're doing.
Thank you. Well, appreciate you having us today, or having me.
Well, I want you to hold there. I'm going to just take you into just chatting real quick. And thanks again for coming on.
My pleasure.